A creepy clown has just chomped a monstrous chunk out of the box office, and it is not alone. This year, horror's Annabelle creation and the fantastic Get Out have thrived while other genres struggle to draw in the crowds. The Stephen King adaptation about the evil Pennywise has made nearly $180 million, £134 million worldwide in its opening weekend, the biggest ever opening for a horror. Its official horror films are firmly part of the mainstream, the good or bad. The Conjuring universe kicked off in 2013, buoyed by the success of the Insidious series. The supernatural sequels and spin-offs that followed its success have since magicked themselves into the worldwide top 30, a list that's more typically dominated by action, sci-fi and family films. Annabelle and Annabelle Creation were both part of this phenomenon. The latter made it to #1 at the US box office, and there's more to come. There are spin-offs called The Nun, Scarier Than It Sounds, and The Crooked Man in the Offing, alongside The Conjuring 3. It seems audiences cannot get enough. Lily Taylor in The Conjuring. Photograph New Line Cinema Sports Photo Limited. All-Star So Why the Stampede over to Ian Sandwell, box office reporter at Industry Mag Screen International. There's always a core audience willing to turn out for a horror, and if it gets good reviews, it can cross over into the more general Friday night crowd. Both Annabelle Creation and it had built-in audience recognition, so that doesn't hurt. It is a genuinely good movie that's received some of the best reviews for a mainstream horror in some time. It's led to it being a film that can appeal across different audiences, for the generation terrified by the 1990 adaptation to teenagers, for whom it might be the first ever horror. Cinema staff have noted the variety of punters pouring in to see it. Picture House's Claire Binns points to the nostalgic influences in the 80s SET film. It's really a Spielberg-Lucas film for those that were too young for when those directors were cranking out the most iconic films. Stranger Things led the way. Most contemporary horrors owe a debt to more sinister classics. Period horrors such as Annabelle have taken visual and thematic cues from supernatural 60s and 70s horror, while Get Out put a modern, racial spin on the genre with a Stepford Wives vibe, also owing a debt to Rosemary's Baby. The latter is echoed in Darren Aronofsky's new film Mother, out this weekend. According to Alan Jones, director of London festival Fright Fest, horror is a cyclical genre. There's always one movie that kicks off another golden era. First it was Hammer, then Psycho, then Rosemary's Baby, then The Exorcist, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, Blair Witch, Hostel, Paranormal Activity, Saw, and now it's The Conjuring universe and it. In terms of box office success, the movie world is seesawing between subgenres such as slasher, psychological, paranormal, teen, comedy, horror, found footage and torture porn. Remakes of Asian films have also made a significant dent in the box office. The Ring and The Grudge both place in the top 30 horrors of all time. And just as Last House on the Left and Night of the Living Dead helped popularize the genre in the 60s and 70s, indie hits still give studios fresh encouragement to produce mainstream horror. Mia Farrow in Rosemary's Baby. Photograph All-Star Paramount. The rule can also work in reverse. There's a reason studios churn out horrors that are basically just loud noises without any thought to atmosphere, says Sandwell. It's because they generally pull in an audience on the opening weekend at least. But maybe it, which balances jump scares with likable, well-rounded characters and a genuinely creepy atmosphere, could lead to studios taking more of a risk when it comes to what constitutes mainstream horror. While a film based on jump scares and young kids bonding seems relatively benign, the rise of so-called torture porn raises more troubling questions. I'm a big fan of paranormal horror but found the extremes of Hostel and Saw, which contain extended torture scenes, the most challenging part of my otherwise rewarding job as a film critic. A teenage horror fan once told me, it's fine if you don't imagine it is happening to you. Aren't we supposed to be identifying with the characters we see on screen, and if we're not, are we becoming dangerously desensitized? Alice Haylett Bryan, a lecturer in film studies at King's College, London, says certain subgenres of horror are undoubtedly getting more extreme, but this is the case across culture as a whole, with computer games and television programs such as The Walking Dead. We are now living in an age where real acts of violence, and indeed death, have been screened on Facebook and YouTube. Could it not be argued that this desensitizes viewers on a more fundamental and concerning level? Millie Bobby Brown as 11 in Stranger Things. Photograph. When if SHES right, then perhaps this overall desensitization is making younger people bolder in the movie choices. I see horror constantly regenerating and attracting a much younger audience who can now access content in the way we never could, and are getting intrigued by what the genre possibilities are, says Alan Jones. The good news for cinemas is that today's teens and 20-somethings watch horror on the big screen as well as on streams or downloads. Student Andrew Williams, 19, recently went to see it with his friends. He says the best horror movies need to be watched in total darkness with surround sound and silence, but with other people around you so that there is an atmosphere of fear in the room. As for choosing what to watch, we decide as a group. Many of my friends don't love horror, so it has to be enticing. With easy access to trailers and online reviews, it's easy to see how recent generations may be persuaded to shell out for cinema tickets when the parents and grandparents would have opted for DVD or video. Williams' experience also highlights the influence of peer pressure. Young people have always been more inclined to use cinema outings as social experiences and may be led by dominant members of the social group. Mike Berry, a clinical forensic psychologist at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, says most people go in small groups to the cinema. Individuals apparently enjoy horror films more in the presence of a stronger character, and less when with someone else who is weak and frightened. It's not just age that's altering. Jones says the gender gap is narrowing. The female demo at Fright Fest has grown consistently over the years. Now I'd say it was roughly 60% male, 40% female. Picture has its bins, says women are now just as keen to see and openly enjoy what was seen in the past is a boy's subject matter. Steve Oram, writer and star of British horror comedy Sightseers, suggests horror has a much wider gender appeal these days. It's less for sweaty teenage boys in shorts. And that's a good thing. All in all, horror looks on the way to becoming cinema's most reliable profit generator. But surely not everyone likes scary movies. Perhaps the typical traits of a horror fan are more common than we think these days. Berry says there is a significant correlation between people who accept rule-breaking behavior and have an interest in horror movies. People who watch horror films want to be frightened, excited and scared, yet psychologically distance themselves from the reality. Peter Janison J. Hernandez in Hostel. Photograph. All-Star Lionsgate. That's a change from the moral panics of the 80s and 90s. 20 years ago, continues Berry, it was suggested people who loved the blood and gore displayed low empathy, with males often strongly identifying with the villain, while thrill watchers displayed empathy with the victims, and liked the suspense of the film. Berry also cites Carl Jung on the genre's more general appeal. Apparently, he believed horror films tapped into primordial archetypes buried deep in our collective subconscious. Images like Shadow and Mother play an important role in the horror genre. Others have argued that people watch violent horror films to relieve themselves of aggressive feelings. Haylett Bryan points to the wider meaning of horror booms. The political and cultural climate undoubtedly influences both the production and reception of horror cinema. The success of Get Out and its exploration of the fetishization and exploitation of the black body is testament to that. How horror cinema responds to the Trump presidency through the types of film produced, for example, will be very interesting. But across international horror as a whole, over the last 10 years or so, the rise in far-right political support has been reflected in narratives that allegorically or directly explore race, immigration and nationhood. Lulu Wilson in Annabelle Creation. Photograph. Justin Lubin. Gareth Tunley, who directed the British psychological horror The Ghoul, says horror writers have to tap into the subconscious in order to access anything remotely scary, so exploring the things the rest of society would prefer swept under the carpet or locked up in the woodshed goes with the territory. So is there something about our current society that is driving people into the cinemas, seeking scares? Stephen Prince is professor of cinema at Virginia Tech. Whether or not the world is a more dangerous place today than in earlier eras is debatable. How many of us, for example, would choose to live in a time before antibiotics, but people today may feel they are under greater threats than ever before. Part of this is due to the interconnected world. The internet magnifies a sense of peril. More people in US die from car accidents than from terrorist attacks, but terrorism seems much scarier than cars because it gets plenty of news coverage. Horror films address questions that continue to haunt us, and these have to do with the frailty of the human body, the fragility of our hold on life, and the ambiguities about what a human being is and why people can't be trusted to remain reliably human. As for the opening weekend of It Magica, a sociologist and the author of Scream-Chilling Adventures in the Science of Fear, takes a topical approach. After weathering, literally and figuratively, 2 hurricanes and a political climate match, we're all ready to escape reality for a while and fight a monster we know we can beat. There is a real sense of satisfaction when our fears are made real, at least real on the big screen, and we can celebrate the defeat. Maybe the worse things get in the real world, the more we need the emotional release of being scared half to death, says Tunley. When you're living in a world which may end in nuclear fire at any point, a bit of casual on-screen dismemberment seems an appealing bit of light relief. Send in the clowns.